Hello everybody, welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. I'm Stephanie Haney.
I'm Mike Polk Jr. Folks, it's just 97 days until the election. We are in the home stretch now.
We are getting there. So we've got a packed show for you today. We've got 3 guests for you. The first 2 are Republican and Democratic leaders from the state of Ohio. They're launching this new venture where they're trying to build trust in our electoral processes. So we'll be talking to former Ohio Secretary of State Ken Blackwell and also former U.S. Representative for Ohio Zach Space about their Democracy Defense Project.
And Stephanie, we'll also be talking with the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Ohio, Jen Miller. She's going to talk about the victory her group won in court in support of Ohioans with disabilities.
And of course, you know, we've got your vice presidential update, and we'll give you the latest information that we have for you about this big Senate race we've got going on in Ohio.
We're also going to tell you those key voting dates that you need to know.
Because it is all about voting today on Ohio Has Issues. And speaking of voting, first we're going to start with some news about the proposed redistricting amendment in our Ohio Roundup.
Now, Governor DeWine did make his feelings very clear this morning in a press conference, and I believe we have a clip, don't we?
Yeah, we'll play that now.
I'm talking today about redistricting and efforts to end gerrymandering in the state of Ohio. The voters passed our current redistricting constitutional provisions by a large vote with bipartisan support. Despite this, my personal experience with our current procedure is that it simply does not work very well. Now, there will be an amendment on this fall's ballot to change the Ohio Constitution in a way that its proponents say would eliminate gerrymandering in Ohio. I'm afraid that if this amendment passes in a relatively short time, after the voters see the results, see the districts that have been produced, voters would once again demand change and would be even more disillusioned with the whole mess. Services are delivered at the local level. We are a local government state. Services are delivered at the local, at the county, at the village, at the city, at the township level. And we should do everything we can to avoid, if possible, the splitting of these political subdivisions. It's important that they not be split unnecessarily. What I have just described is not a new concept. In fact, Iowa has been doing it this way for 4 decades, and they've been doing it with success. I believe Ohio should adopt the Iowa plan.
So that was a little bit of what Governor Mike DeWine said this morning, but got his main points across. So we did get a response to that from retired Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. She's leading the charge in support of the redistricting amendment that will be on the ballot in November.
And Stephanie, how did she feel about Governor DeWine saying he doesn't like her amendment?
She was not stoked about it. Also important to note here, too, by the way, she is the former Republican lieutenant governor of the state of Ohio, so she is also a Republican, much like Governor Mike DeWine.
And a friend of the show.
And a friend of the show. She's been on the show a couple times. And she served as lieutenant governor under Republican Governor Bob Taft.
I'll read a little response from her. This is from Maureen O'Connor, former Justice Maureen O'Connor. The disinformation from the governor today is insulting to everyone in Ohio, and especially insulting to 500,000 Ohioans, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents who put the Citizens Not Politicians amendment on the November ballot. Governor DeWine voted with his fellow politicians 7 times for unconstitutional maps and now says what Ohio really needs is what he calls the, quote, Iowa plan, a system where the governor and other politicians get the final say on maps. For nearly a year, we have been publicly collecting signatures in all 88 counties, and now, 97 days before the election, he tells Ohioans that he and his friends in the legislature are already scheming to overturn what voters will pass in November. We're done listening to self-serving politicians tell us how they want to keep rigging the game. On to November. Since the governor demonstrated in his rambling, disjointed press conference today that he does not understand our amendment, I am offering to sit down and meet with him to explain it.
So we will keep an eye on that, and if the governor and former Justice O'Connor do get an opportunity to talk, I'm sure it'll be news, and I'm sure we will bring that to you.
I hope they do get to sit down and hash that out a little bit. Wouldn't that be good for Ohioans?
That would be great. I think it would be great for everyone to have a clear understanding of what's on the ballot and kind of get to the bottom of this.
Yes, and if Governor DeWine has sincere issues and worries about it, then maybe she can help address them, or maybe even his thinking might be able to help everyone involved in this movement. I mean, he is the governor. We have to involve him in this in some way, but today he really did come out and say he does not like that this is going to happen, and I hope that we can figure out a way to communicate that to the people.
So we will be focusing on this next week. It's a big topic. We're going to dive into exactly what this Iowa plan is and all of that. So stay tuned. That'll be coming next week.
There's going to be a lot of response to that too that we'll be getting back to you. People have some strong feelings that are already coming out about this.
They sure do. Okay, let's get to some key dates for you when it comes to voting in this upcoming election. Election day is Tuesday, November 5th, and your deadline to register to vote is October 7th.
National Voter Registration Day is Tuesday, September 17th.
So if you are a voter in Cuyahoga County on September 17th, you can register to vote at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. This is kind of a special event meant to drive voter turnout.
That's cool of Rocket Mortgage, the Soho or whatever, to open it up for democracy. Thank you for that.
Romo
Foho?
Romo Fiho?
Fohi? We'll figure it out. Somebody tell us.
Okay, so a little bit more about voter registration, actually, and list maintenance tied to the National Change of Address database. We want to kind of clear up some misinformation, so here's a video about that. Access to voting is always an important issue, and it's something that gets talked about a lot online, especially during a presidential election year. When we posted about an upcoming voter registration purge tied to the National Change of Address database happening here in Ohio, we saw people questioning whether this is a strategic move to help one party over the other this November. So let's verify. Is voter registration list maintenance tied to the NCOA database a Republican tactic used to get rid of voters before an election? Our sources on this are the Ohio Secretary of State's website, the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, and the Ohio Revised Code. It's the Secretary of State's job to make sure our elections are carried out fairly. To do that, the Ohio Revised Code authorizes removing voters from registration rolls who have moved by using the National Change of Address database. This is required by law to happen every year, not just before presidential elections. What our current Republican Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, does that he's not required to do is publish an annual list called the Registration Readiness Roster. This is supposed to give Ohio citizens a chance to fix their registration before it's canceled. Anthony Callagher, Deputy Director of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, told us using the NCOA database to cancel voter registrations has been happening for decades. He said, quote, "This is not something that Republican Frank LaRose or even John Husted put into effect when he was Secretary of State. This process was also being carried out under Jennifer Brunner, a Democrat, when she served in that role from 2007 to 2011. A directive from July of 2007 confirms this. So we can verify that no, voter registration list maintenance tied to the National Change of Address database is not a Republican tactic used to get rid of voters before an election." If you're concerned about your registration, we have a link on WKYC.com where you can check your status.
And speaking of voter registration, here is a little information about a potential scam that you should avoid.
In this election year, scammers are trying to use your desire to vote to steal your personal information through text messages and phone calls, claiming to be able to register you to vote online or send you a mail-in ballot. We can verify this kind of thing is a phishing scam meant to help thieves steal your identity. If you get targeted like this, don't share your personal details either on the phone or by text, and don't click on any links. The only way to register to vote online in Ohio is through the Ohio Secretary of State's website, which is voteohio.gov. So avoid that scam. You do not want to get tricked into giving out your personal information via a text or phone call, somebody trying to tell you they're going to register you or get you a mail-in ballot.
And just a reminder, folks, to vote in person, you do need a photo ID. As of April 7, 2023, Ohioans who are 17 years and older can receive a state ID card at no cost from the BMV.
Which is a nice move since you do need it to vote
Now,
if you're going to be 18 by Election Day.
Indeed. There are several types of valid photo identification, though, just so you know. It doesn't just have to be a driver's license. You can have an Ohio's driver's license, State of Ohio ID card, an interim ID form issued by the Ohio BMV, a U.S. passport card, a U.S. military ID card, Ohio National Guard ID card, or U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs ID card. Any of those are eligible as well. All photo IDs must have the following: an expiration date that is not passed, a photograph of the voter, and the voter's name, which must substantially conform to the voter's name as it appears in the poll list or in the poll book. In other words, I couldn't use my DJ name, Dr. Good Vibes. They would not allow that.
They would not.
Just one more important thing to note here, folks. Even though the governor just posted online that you can add your driver's license or state ID to your Apple Wallet now in Ohio, you need to know that it doesn't work as your voter ID. You will still need your physical photo ID with you in order to vote.
Here's the thing that you need to know too, by the way. The important thing is that your photo ID not be expired. So for example, say you have a driver's license that's not expired, it's totally valid, but you've moved. As long as your address is correct at your polling location, it's okay if your old address is still on your ID. Just so you know.
A lot of things to consider there.
It is. We've got more information on it on the Secretary of State website. So if you have any questions about it, just go ahead and go there.
You ready to move on to the Veep stakes?
We are. Let's talk about the Veep stakes. You know that your sitting senator for Ohio, JD Vance, has been tapped as the GOP candidate for running alongside former President Donald Trump. Well, there was a video that came out last week that was posted on social media, reposted, I should say, where JD Vance is telling a group of people that parents with children should get an extra vote per child. So here's the clip that was making the rounds on social media.
Let's give votes to all children in this country, but let's give control over those votes to the parents of those children. When you go to the polls in this country as a parent, you should have more power. You should have more of an ability to speak your voice in our democratic republic than people who don't have kids. Let's face the consequences and the reality. If you don't have as much of an investment in the future of this country, maybe you shouldn't get nearly the same voice.
Now we wanted to share important context surrounding this video because it's actually from a longer video that was posted in 2021. It was a speech in front of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. That's the group that posted it. So here's a little bit more of that video from the full video.
Enjoy some context.
But I worry actually that there is a structural democratic disadvantage built in to our society right now. I'll be simple and direct about it. Compare, for example, the leaders of the Democrat Party, the people who may very well be the next president of the United States. Compare their investment in this country, compare the fact that they don't have families against a middle-class Ohio family that spends a ton of resources and a ton of time educating their children, teaching them to love their country. When those kids get older, those kids will go off and fight in American wars. And when all of us reach the point that all of us will reach, they will be the ones who take care of us in old age. That's not something you can buy if you don't have people. These children are the future of this country. And yet, the parents who have them actually have no advantage in our democratic process. They have a smaller voice in some ways, in very many cases, than the people who don't have any children at all. The children who come from these families have no real representative in our democracy. Why don't we change that? Now, some people will say this is radical and this is crazy. The Democrats are talking about giving the vote to 16-year-olds, but let's do this instead. Let's give votes to all children in this country, but let's give control over those votes to the parents of those children. When you go to the polls in this country as a parent, you should have more power. You should have more of an ability to speak your voice in our democratic republic than people who don't have kids. Let's face the consequences and the reality. If you don't have as much of an investment in the future of this country, maybe you shouldn't get nearly the same voice. Now, people will say, and I'm sure the Atlantic and the Washington Post and all the usual suspects will criticize me about this in the coming days. Well, doesn't this mean that non-parents don't have as much of a voice as parents? Doesn't this mean that parents get a bigger say in how our democracy functions? Yes, absolutely.
If you're interested and you want to see the full video of JD Vance making that speech, you can find that on the YouTube channel for the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. That's where we found it. And I want you to know that I did actually reach out to his Senate office to get his current thoughts on those comments from 2021 and didn't get a reply from the office.
All right, well, from one vice presidential candidate to another potential vice presidential candidate, who is Kamala Harris going to choose to be her running mate? We don't know yet, do we?
We do not. It's a very good question. A lot of people are wondering.
Now, her VP selection will probably be announced relatively soon. The DNC said that they would nominate her officially by August 7th, and the official VP nom will likely come around then. Now, She entered this race, and she's gotten quite a bit of heat ever since stepping up to replace Joe Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee. We wanted to know what kind of an effect this was having on Ohio and how this could affect Ohio voting. Luckily, our good friend Jeremy Pelzer from Cleveland Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com just wrote an article right along those lines. Enjoy my interview with So happy you could be joining us, Jeremy.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
And thanks always. It's really cool of you to speak to us from the afterlife like you are right now. How are things on the other side?
I'll be honest, the food court here is not as great as I expected.
Well, don't spoil it. I want to find out on my own when I die. Well, you had a very interesting piece come out just last week. Obviously, Kamala Harris has taken over the mantle as the Democratic presidential candidate, and you wrote an article called Kamala Harris could jumpstart Democratic turnout in Ohio's largest cities. Why is she still expected to lose the Buckeye State? You talked to some experts, Jeremy. Why is that she is still expected to lose in spite of the fact that she's got the wind at her back, it seems?
Well, Mike, if I can take you back in time to 2008 and 2012, obviously Obama won here in Ohio, and one big reason he won is because he really goosed urban turnout, particularly women voters, Black voters, younger voters. And that really helped propel him to victory here. And then obviously flash forward to 2024. And no one that I've talked to, or at least very few people, really think that Kamala Harris is going to win Ohio this year, especially given that that Trump has won here by 8-9 points for the past two elections. And so my piece is looking into why that is. So what I found is basically, even if Harris can get those turnout numbers in major cities up to where Obama got them. I'm talking about like the 11 largest cities. So obviously Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, but also places like Toledo, Dayton, even Youngstown. And if we see that these numbers are up to where they were in 2008, 2012, it still wouldn't be nearly enough for Harris. It would only be about maybe half the margin that Trump won by in 2018 and 2020.
What are the experts you talk to? Why do they say that is? Why did this shift happen, and how did it happen so rapidly?
Well, because there's a couple of reasons. If you look at what Trump won that Obama did not win, one is these northern Ohio counties, mostly along Lake Erie, so like Ottawa County, Wood County, which is not along the lake, but still northern Ohio. These counties went for Obama, but now they are pretty solid for Trump. And then, of course, everyone's heard a lot about how the Youngstown area has gone from being a pretty reliably blue area to being one that's pretty red. And then just in general, you have all these smaller counties that were pretty Republican, even, they've been Republican for decades, but we're talking about the margins. So maybe Obama won one of these counties by like, say, 5,000 votes. But now you had Trump win them by about 20,000 votes. And so while that isn't a lot by itself, it adds up to a pretty big margin. So even if you get a turnout in Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland, it's really not going to make up for the difference that Republicans have had elsewhere in the state.
Do the experts that you talk to say if it will actually have an effect now that the Democrats replaced Joe Biden on the ticket with Kamala? That is to say, would the margins have been different, do they think, if he would have remained at the top of the ticket?
Well, obviously, there's the boring caveat that we'll never know. You can't prove what Joe Biden would have done in Ohio this year. But the expectation among the experts I talked to, and Democrats as well, is that Harris is going to probably do better, that it'll be a net benefit for Democrats, that she will get turnout out in urban areas and among women and among minorities and among younger voters in greater numbers than Biden would have gotten. And while there's some offset there because Biden, one of the main reasons he was nominated in 2020 is the expectation that he would appeal to working class white voters, the type who have been moving over to Trump, that Harris would not do they might lose some compared to what Biden would have got, but it wouldn't be enough to offset the gain she would see among urban voters. But again, overall, Trump has quite a big lead here, and I haven't talked to anyone who really said that it would be enough to overcome that.
You did mention that the selection of Ohioan JD Vance for the vice presidential ticket for the Republicans might have some sort of an effect on the numbers in Ohio. Do you see that being a factor?
Obviously, when you have a vice presidential candidate from Ohio, not only does that bring more publicity, it can excite people. There have been various attempts to look at how much picking a vice presidential candidate from a state actually affects the raw number of votes that they get in that state in past elections, and it hasn't been as much as advertised. So we'll see what JD Vance is able to do, but it's not nothing that the person who was running with Donald Trump is from Middletown, Ohio, and that can get people to notice the ticket in a way they might not have otherwise noticed.
Finally, you did say in there, as most of everyone you've talked to assumes, that Donald Trump will probably win Ohio based on precedent, based on what we've seen recently, based on trends. But you did say that Ohio's 3 largest counties do give Democrats a bit of hope. How is that?
Well, because while, say, the city of Cleveland, for example, they've seen a decline in voter registrations and total votes since 2008, but Cuyahoga County as a whole, meaning the suburbs, has been pretty stable. So, while city turnout has been down, suburban turnout has gone up. And Franklin County, of course, has gained population. Hamilton County had more ballots cast in 2020 as a whole. So when you're talking about these urban counties, as opposed to urban cities, you're actually seeing turnout rise, and overall, taken together, that helps Democrats.
That's great. Thank you, Jeremy, for your time. Thanks for your analysis. As always, we appreciate the insight, and go walk gently into that light.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye, Jeremy. Thank you. Thanks again to Jeremy, who was speaking with us the day after he got back from vacation. That's how much he cares.
That's dedication.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
All right, let's move on to your Senate race update. This is new news that hasn't happened for quite some time. Our current sitting senator for Ohio, Sherrod Brown, we have learned he will not be getting the Fraternal Order of Police endorsement. And this is the first time that's happened in 12 years. We can also tell you his opponent, Republican Bernie Moreno, will also not be getting that endorsement. So here is why that is. The Fraternal Order of Police didn't like this tweet that Sherrod Brown posted. This was following an officer-involved shooting where a 16-year-old girl died. And in that case, a grand jury did not indict that officer. Mike Weinman, who is the Ohio FOP spokesperson, said that Brown missed the endorsement by 4 votes. Here's a quote from him. People here genuinely don't know where he stands on things like George Floyd and qualified immunity. Our voters know their stuff, and he just wasn't being clear enough about where he stands. Brown has always been great for supplies, vests, helping us get resources, but I think now our people aren't as sure they can trust him. Now, the last time that Sherrod Brown didn't get the endorsement from the FOP was in 2006. That was when he was first running for the U.S. Senate for Ohio against then-Senator Mike DeWine, who is our current governor. The FOP endorsed DeWine that year, but Brown won and has gotten their endorsement every election since. Weinman said Moreno didn't get the endorsement either because the screening committee passed on him. This is kind of interesting when it's on the floor. Only the people that can be voted on are the people who passed the screening committee. And the screening committee passed on Bernie Moreno because they said he had a lack of political experience.
All right, so no endorsement. Sorry, kids.
No endorsement from the FOP.
Time to move on to our main topic today, which is a new organization created to ensure, at least intended to ensure, the trust in our election results here. They're called the Democracy Defense Project, and it's an information campaign is what it is, folks. They say they are working to restore faith in public elections. Bipartisan thing, group made up of Democrats and Republicans. There were 7 battleground states, or 6 battleground states in Ohio, technically, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got it, but we're happy they're here. We have their Ohio representatives actually with us right now. Former Republican Ohio Secretary of State Ken Blackwell and former U.S. Rep of Ohio Zach Space. Let's say hi to them now.
Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Space, thank you very much for being with us here on Ohio Has Issues.
Great to be with you.
Pleasure.
All right, well, gentlemen, just to start things off, we want to hear about the Democracy Defense Project. If one of you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about it, why you formed it, and what your goal is.
Well, I think we both have been recruited to participate in a national operation. Zach and I are concentrating on Ohio because we know that system the best, and we think that we have plenty of reasons to sort of beat our chest because of the integrity, the bipartisan integrity that is brought to our system. Look, I believe, and I know that Zach believes, that a free and fair electoral system is the foundation of a free society, and particularly of our constitutional republic. What we know is that people speak speak to those who govern through the ballot box. And so making sure that that system is one of integrity is of paramount importance. And we share that ambition and that desire, as well as a commitment to making sure that happens, particularly in the state of Ohio.
Zach, I'll ask you to kind of follow up on that. Would you say the goal of the Democracy Defense Project is more about establishing trust, or is it about ensuring integrity, or is it a mix of both?
It's really about establishing trust. The integrity's there. What we know, and this has been adjudicated by courts and special panels and legislative bodies across the country, that we have a fair, open, transparent, and efficient democracy. And what I was drawn to with this group, and the reason I'm participating in this group, is it's a bipartisan effort. We have way too much tribalism. The rhetoric is getting way out of hand, and when people, for their own political benefits, impugn the integrity of the electoral process for their own, again, self-interest, that compromises democracy as a whole. And to Ken's point, free and open elections are the hallmark of a democratic society, and this organization is committed to invoking trust in that process.
Now, you said you guys are representing Ohio, but there are 7 states that this organization is representing. Why did they select those 7, and why just those 7? Is election integrity not an issue anywhere else?
All the other states are what would be considered battleground states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire, and Georgia, I believe. Ohio, however, has a special significance of its own, given the high-stakes, high-profile Senate race that is ongoing here right now. And so I think that's one of the things that this organization found attractive about Ohio.
Ken, you're a Republican, former Secretary of State here in Ohio. Zach, you're a Democrat, a former member of the House of Representatives. So I'll direct it back to Ken first. How do two of you with two very different ideologies come together for a group like this?
Well, look, I think Ohio is a model state, quite naturally, as a former Secretary of State. I would believe that. But I think our system is a perfectly bipartisan system. We understand that elections are human enterprises. And as such, there are irregularities, there are mistakes, and there are contested areas of administrative procedure. But in the final analysis, we have a system that once a decision is fully adjudicated and a decision is made, you suck it up and you say, this is a system and the results are in, period. And you move on, and if in fact there are things that need to be ironed out as we go forward, you work on that through the state legislature.
Mr. Space, it's great to see, obviously, bipartisanship, you guys coming together like this, but what are some actual tangible steps that you guys are taking as opposed to what people might see just as rhetoric?
What we are doing is Ken and I are appearing together in a number of forums to demonstrate this is a bipartisan issue. Both parties have a stake in this. I did serve in the United States Congress representing a wonderful Appalachian region in southeastern Ohio. What makes this special is, again, we've got someone like Ken Blackwell here. Ken and I don't agree on a lot of issues when it comes to policy, but we can agree to disagree. And we can also agree about one thing in particular, and that's the fundamental importance of not just having a fair and transparent electoral process, but establishing trust in that process. We've seen all too much in the last few years, and this goes back quite some time. It didn't originate with January 6th of 2021. We've seen candidates in both parties, when they've lost elections, suggest that it was because the ballots were rigged or they weren't counted properly. I do grant you this, we've seen a significant increase in that rhetoric over time. And I think that's one of the reasons this organization came together. So Mike, to answer your question, Ken just penned an excellent op-ed that was printed in Toledo Dispatch, or Toledo Blade yesterday. We've done joint op-eds together. We're going to continue to try to get the word out and communicate, again, from trusted bipartisan sources, that as much as we might disagree on policy, one thing we can all agree upon is that the election is fair, it's transparent, and that the results should be honored.
What we know from experience is that you build trust from the bottom up. There's no way that you can build trust from the top down. So that means that we have to encourage people to be full participants in the process at the precinct level. When you have that sort of bipartisan participation at the basic level, it is easy to build. It is easy to build trust. And let's understand that the value of our system is that it is a decentralized system. There are 50 states that administer elections across this country, and there are thousands of precincts. So building at the precinct level is where you begin to build trust, rebuild trust, and that's why I think working in tandem with Zach, we can do it, particularly in the state of Ohio.
Ken, I want to go back to something that happened regarding the 2020 election. You did sign a letter from the Conservative Action Project. It's dated December 10th, 2020, and it says in part, quote, "There is no doubt President Donald J. Trump is the lawful winner of the presidential election. Joe Biden is not president-elect," end quote. So I want to ask you if you stand by that statement now.
Well, I did. At that time, when we wrote that letter, we were contesting elections in several states. And once the process was fully adjudicated and he was deemed the president of the United States, I said, yes, he is the president of the United States, and didn't question it. But at that point on December 10th, there were dozens of members of Congress that were questioning some practices and situations in the state. But once it was decided, I condemned the violence on January the 6th. And told folks that Joe Biden was the elected president of the United States and had been certified as such.
When you make a statement that was signed like that, and then now you are advocating as you are for election integrity trust, does that speak to how important this is now and kind of the things we've seen over the last 4 years and how ideology can change? What do you make of that?
Well, if you want me to answer it first, just think about the fact that just a couple years ago, you had the former president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, basically saying that Donald Trump was not a legitimately elected president. He had been certified as president, but President Carter was still questioning his legitimacy. We all have to get on the page and say, look, we have to say, time out, it's over. Now, if there are problems that need to be fixed, let's get busy and fix them. And that's what we're trying to do.
Mr. Space, I know you guys are pretty early into this project, but what kind of resistance are you meeting, if any, so far when you're trying to get this message out? Are people pushing back, or are people pretty open to the message?
I get mixed messages, and frankly, we live in a world where people are not accustomed to seeing people like Zach Space and Ken Blackwell stand up together and argue and on behalf of the same issue. And that's part of the problem. That is actually the problem. The divisive nature of politics, which is frankly being stoked by those who are seeking office, and that's instigating this massive social media messaging campaign that focuses on really all of our darker angels. I mean, we're transcending elections here with this comment, but we need to tone it down. We need to start, agreeing to disagree. There was a time we could do that in this country. Some recent polling suggests that most Americans long for that. What Ken and I are trying to do is serve by example. I'm going to support Kamala Harris, and Ken's going to support Donald Trump, and he's entitled to do that, and I'm entitled to do that. And we may disagree on that, but we can agree that the process is fair. So this is all about us trying to really demonstrate through our actions that people can come together, even when they're diametrically opposed from a policy perspective, to identify an issue that we agree on and work together. And I think there's something important in that.
Mr. Blackwell, one tip for people who are trying to reach across the aisle, talk to somebody on the other side about something like this that we should have common ground on, one way to get through them if you're meeting kind of resistance.
Well, here's my fear, and this is what drives me. One, if you begin to build a system where there's no trust, people will not engage. Once you don't have people engaging in the process, you begin to see democracy crumble. So let's get into dialogue. One, we change things in this country through direct action, through legislative processes, through the courts, but we also change things in this country when we in fact talk heart to heart mind to mind, spirit to spirit, and in fact, we have a history in our almost 250 years of getting things done, and Zach and I are leaning into that, and I think that we'll win.
Do you have a tip that you'd like to share, Zach?
Again, most of us, and when I say us, I mean Americans writ large, really do yearn for compromise and for constructive dialogue. And the only thing I would say is to those watching who are part of that 70%, and I suspect that the number actually may be higher, let's practice what we think. Let's resist the temptation to delve into these hate-filled, misleading tactics. To Ken's point, this problem is not going to be solved from the top down. It's going to be a bottom-up solution. It takes every one of us to be thoughtful about how we consume news, about how we share information with others. So that's what we're urging. The Democracy Defense Project is urging us to be more thoughtful about those actions and recognize that at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want prosperity, we want freedom, we want a country that we can be proud of. We can disagree on how to get there, but one thing we have to come together on is the electoral process that structures that is fair, it is transparent, and it's efficient.
Okay, and I also want to ask you before we let you go here, I'm just out of curiosity, have you connected with state officials in the states that you're targeting, or how exactly are you operating alongside or maybe in conjunction with those groups?
Zach and I are focused on Ohio. We are going to have a very vigorous senatorial race, and we want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the rules of the game, and that there are no thumbs on the scale, tipping the scale one way or another. And I think when you do that, people will live with the results, no matter how aggressively a race is fought.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Good luck with your entire project. We honestly respect what you're doing. It's great for Ohio. It's great for the country, and thanks for your effort.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks, Zach. Hey, Zach, let me just tell you, I got my grandkids here. I can tell you right now what you should be expecting. a lot of fun and a lovable chaos.
A lot of loud.
Something tells me you're a great grandpa.
Good luck, gentlemen. See, that's cordial. That's cordial. Thanks, guys. Bye. Thank you, gentlemen. We do have a statement from Secretary of State Frank LaRosa's spokesperson, Ben Kendall. Quote, "They reached out to us before they officially announced the group, and we appreciate their mission in the election space."
Okay, here's something that I want to make very clear for everybody watching and listening. This is the Democracy Defense Project. It is bipartisan. It's working in 7 states. Those states, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. This is not to be confused with the Defend Democracy Project.
Oh, that's dangerous.
It is very, very tricky. This is not that. The Defend Democracy Project, which are not the people that we just talked to, they're also working in the election integrity and trust space, also in 7 states, but not in Ohio. They are working in Michigan and North Carolina instead of Ohio and New Hampshire. So there's a difference there. And the objective of this other group is written differently. That group is actively calling out former President Donald Trump for denying that he lost the 2020 election. And they're saying that they are focused on making sure Trump and his allies don't try to steal the 2024 election. So it's a very targeted message from them. So do not confuse the two.
How could you? They're so different. Honestly, it's the Democracy Defense Project and the Defend Democracy Project.
Yeah, that's rough.
Good luck out there, everybody. Okay, now I understand that we have a big lawsuit to tell these folks about. What's that all about?
Yeah, there was a lawsuit that was filed related to some things that are happening here in Ohio with voters with disabilities. So the federal court struck down restrictions on House Bill 458. This was a bill that passed here in Ohio, and it had limitations on who could help voters with disabilities effectively cast their ballots. So what happened here, the federal court in this case ruled that the Voting Rights Act allows voters with disabilities to select a person of their choice to help them with voting. And that includes returning a voter's absentee ballot, which is different than the wording of House Bill 458. So the League of Women Voters of Ohio is one of the groups who filed the lawsuit, which led to that ruling. And that's who we talk to now, one of the people behind this lawsuit, Executive Director of the Ohio League of Women Voters, Jen Miller. Jen, thank you for being with us here on Ohio Has Issues.
Thank you.
Big victory for the League of Women Voters recently with a court ruling. So let's backtrack a little bit and talk about what was the reason for this lawsuit. What was going on in House Bill 458?
Ohioans with disabilities experience far greater barriers to the ballot box, and often that results in them not voting at all. We think our democracy works best when all voters can participate, and we did try to get laws changed in the legislature and through advocacy with the Secretary of State. That didn't work. So we had to bring this case.
And in the case, there were particular restrictions in there on who could provide assistance to people with disabilities. That's what I'm understanding was the issue that was taken with House Bill 458.
Right. So the big concern was that House Bill 458 made it a felony if you were on this approved list of helpers for voters with disabilities. Keep in mind that voters with disabilities are less likely to drive, and therefore it can be harder to get their ballot back to the one county drop box. They may have challenges reaching their mailbox or even sealing their envelope if they have challenges with their hands. And so voters with disabilities often prefer voting absentee, but they have to have someone assist many times. On that list of approved helpers, it's a decent list of approved helpers, but there's some obvious exclusions: grandkids, roommates, in-laws, caregivers. And federal law says that people with disabilities can choose who they want to assist them in the process.
Yeah, those sound like some common sense people who would be very likely to provide help to a person with disabilities in terms of getting their vote in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so bottom line, we don't want voters with disabilities having to choose between voting or putting a loved one at risk for a felony sentence. And that's what this was about. It's not a victory for the league. It's a victory for every Ohio voter, because democracy works best when we can all participate. And voters with disabilities are one of the largest voting blocs in the state. And any of us are one illness or one accident away from having a disability ourselves. And so it's incredibly important that we provide fair access, reasonable access to the people of Ohio who have a disability.
Great point. So it's really a bipartisan issue because, again, disability does not discriminate. As you said, can afflict any of us at any time. So what happens now? So I know House Bill 458 was passed back in April of 2023. So this ruling has come down now. So what happens? Are those particular aspects of it off the books immediately?
If the state does not appeal, this part of the law is struck down, and boards of elections have to accept ballots from grandkids, roommates, caregivers, and county prosecutors know that they can't charge these individuals with felony sentences.
Okay. And this doesn't take any act in order for that to go into effect, the striking down from Ohio legislature, because they're on recess until November. So wondering what happens in terms of this election.
Well, the AG would inform county prosecutors of this change, and the Secretary of State would inform boards of elections.
All right, Jen, thank you very much for breaking it all down for us. We appreciate your time here on Ohio Has Issues.
Thank you so much.
So when I was talking with Jen, she did bring up the possibility that, yes, the state of Ohio could appeal this federal court ruling. So we did get a statement again from Secretary of State Frank LaRosa's spokesperson. He said, quote, "We obviously disagree with the decision and will be consulting with our counsel, the Attorney General, on next steps."
This is a challenge to a law passed by the General Assembly, which has the exclusive authority to set the rules for Ohio's elections. So they'll likely be considering the court's ruling there as well.
So what I thought was interesting about this, we just want to remind you, the General Assembly here in Ohio is on break until November. So they're not likely doing anything about this before the election because, of course, there's always a possibility for a new law to be attempted or something like that, unless they would convene another special session, which, of course, is possible. Anything's possible, but they're not scheduled to be back in session until November.
Does seem pretty unlikely. Even the governor in his announcement today, or in his speech today, was talking about that it's pretty unlikely that these cats are going to get back together before during this break for any sort of work like that. So We'll see, though. Anything can happen in Ohio.
Yeah, and a lot is going to happen between today and our next episode. By our next episode, again, remember the Democratic Party has said they expect Kamala Harris to be officially nominated by August 7th, which will be the next time we talk to you. So we'll probably know her running mate by then.
And we are also, if you'll recall, going to be talking next week to you about this redistricting situation, the amendment where it stands, Governor DeWine's response to it, people's response to Governor DeWine. It's an important thing. And you
the Ohio plan, what that is, what that has to do with us?
Iowa, Ohio, you know, we'll figure it out, but we're gonna get through it together.
I'm counting the syllables. It's the same. Ohio, Iowa.
There you go. That's all you need.
Is that where the similarities end? We shall see.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
See you next week.